all the legislation that we were part of, and things outside of legislation that we've been able to affect in the last year. I'm a small businessman. I own restaurants. I own a cigar shop. I love my businesses. I was actually asked to run. Um, I, I was blessed enough to pray for a week, and my wife and I decided it's time. Um, and we know the dangers of being public figures. I'm not used to getting attacked. When we voted against VW Scout getting $1.3 billion. Yeah, thank you. And it blew the Republicans. They were like, "What are they doing here? Why are they even here?" They sent out mailers in all our districts, and I mean, we estimated between the robocalls and texts and the mailers they right to the people and do what we said we're going to do. I don't lose sleep over any votes. Like I see some people on the House floor struggling over things. We're a pretty tight bunch, and if I have questions when things are speeding up on the floor, I mean, when you're new there, it's like drinking out of a fire hose, fire hydrant. And we've got the support of these guys, walking us through things, texting like, I can't even read this bill, with all the lawyer talk. So anyway, I guess I'll wait for the question and answer time. If you have any questions for a freshman, my perspective is going to be totally different from Josiah's. I say when things are not shocking me down there anymore, that's the time to vote me out, because I mean my jaw hits my desk at least once a day when you hear what goes on with the lobbyists and the backroom deals. I was it's not all bad. I was a pessimist way before I got in there. I was yelling at politicians, and now that I've been in for 6 months, I'm still a pessimist. It's pretty bad, but we're growing our numbers in the Freedom Caucus. It would be insane to try to convince the rhinos down there the way that we see things. So our attitude is, let's just replace them. Let's get good people in there, and that's our challenge: getting good people that are okay to make $10,400 a year as a career, that have the time to do that. Getting good people to do it. But if you don't know somebody, help us find people and donate to them. So we need support. We need to grow our numbers to have more of an effect, and that's it. Thanks. You ready, Josiah?
Ready? Thank you, Jay.
Well, thank you all so much for letting us join you today. I'd like Jay to go first because he's quite a bit more qualified than me, I would say, to speak on these matters. If you haven't ever been to the Melting Pot, that is a good place to go. He's the one that owns that, both the restaurant in Columbia and the one in Greenville. So if you ever get up or get down those directions, give him some business. So kind of wanted to start out by, first of all, thanking each one of you that are here, because our hope is not in the political class. It's not in the establishment that has controlled our politics in South Carolina for decades. You've got these essentially big corporations that drop inordinate amounts of money into the lobbying groups and into the Chamber of Commerce, special interests, that then in turn pretty much tell our legislature what to do and how to vote. But that's not where our hope lies for the state of South Carolina. Our hope actually doesn't even lie in the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, as much as we are grateful for what the Freedom Caucus is and the fact that we have a team coming together. The hope for South Carolina lies in you all. And that's why I'm grateful to be here tonight, because it's we the people that can actually take our country back, can turn this in the right direction. And it's the values that you have in your own families, in your churches, and in your community that's going to make the difference. And so that's the goal, I think, though, that the Freedom Caucus has, is not just to sort of put another political mover on the map, or, you know, another piece in the game of chess, but to actually give a voice to you. And if we can do that, then I think we'll have accomplished our goal. And so we want to take your values and your beliefs and your desire to remain free as a country back to the State House. You know, I think it is time in our country to get serious. And it is, you know, you look at what a lot of these legislators are doing. It's like, why are they serving at all? Why did they get elected? You know, what are they even trying to accomplish? It's a serious time in our country right now. We see, you know, the whole transgender movement, you know, mutilating children. We see the, you know, the abortion industry, of course, you know, gearing up, you know, to make this push across the nation. You know, yes, we have Roe v. Wade overturned, but the abortion industry is not going to let it go easily. And you're seeing even the way that they're advertising get that much more evil as we, you know, after Roe v. Wade. We've seen, you know, as right here in South Carolina, speaking of, while we're on the issue of the transgender of kids, MUSC, that they were, you know, doing gender affirming care for kids as young as 4 years old. And we said, look, we don't know what exactly that entails, but we got to find out. We got to get to the bottom of this. We did a Freedom of Information Act request, and they came back and said, well, we've closed the clinic. And so we were able to shut it down, so that, to our knowledge, we're now no longer mutilating kids in South Carolina, at least not at MUSC. Thank you. But that kind of stuff is happening, and it's happening right under our noses. And who is it that's actually standing up for you in Columbia? So then you've got other issues where, you know, whether it's the court system, right? Whether it's the fact that we've got DEI, woke ideology, being pushed in our colleges and even in our schools. You know, this kind of stuff is happening here in South Carolina, and it's like nobody cares. Nobody stands up against it. And so the Freedom Caucus exists to make that difference and to try to be that voice that a lot of times we haven't seen in Columbia. I think what we need to ask ourselves, really, when we're dealing with, you know, the Freedom Caucus, is not just what is the Freedom Caucus, but why? Why start a group of legislators? Why did we get together and say there's a need for something called the South Carolina Freedom Caucus? And there's basically three reasons. First of all, because we needed a team of people that could strategize, that could work as a unit. You know, the Democrats are good at this. The Democrats are good at having a plan and working together to achieve that plan. But a lot of times the right doesn't do that. The right, you know, doesn't really seem to have goals. It's like we're always back on our heels waiting for something else to be done, you know, to us, instead of actually fighting for conservatism, instead of projecting the vision of why conservatism, family values, freedom, liberty actually would make South Carolina a better place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is so important that we have spaces where we can strategize, where we can put a plan together and then execute that plan as a group. So that's the first reason. The second thing is, as we mentioned, because of the policy shortfalls that we've seen in South Carolina, even though we have such a red state as far as we the people, the legislature is one of the most liberal Republican legislators in the country, right? Like, we know this. We can see the ratings from the American Conservative Union, that is the one that puts CPAC together. And right now, there's actually only two, like, red states that are that are more liberal than us. Alaska is not doing good right now, but previously, actually, South Carolina was at the bottom of the list. We were actually at the very bottom as far as Republican-controlled legislatures doing conservative things. We were the bluest red state, right? And we still are one of, if not at the bottom there. So we have a lot of room to improve. And there's also another study that was done looking at not just the work result, not just how the bills were that were coming out ultimately from the legislature in the states. There was another study that was done. This was put out by the Daily Wire that showed that South Carolina Republicans in our legislature are the most liberal Republicans in the nation, except for one other state, which is Hawaii. So we're at the bottom. We're at the bottom in terms of how our Republican legislators are voting. We're at the bottom in terms of the actual bills that are being enacted into law. And it sometimes seems like people don't care. I know you all care, but in the political world, it's like people don't care. It's like we're just sort of happily oblivious to go on with our little, Republican clubs and allow for the state to, go to where in a handbasket. And that's not something that I'm going to stand for if I'm serving as an elected official. And so that's why I'm here with Freedom Caucus members, is because we have to change those policy goals. And so somebody has to set a different standard. And so that's the second reason I think why we need a Freedom Caucus, is because somebody has to project a vision. Somebody has to say, here's a different standard for why I'm even serving in Columbia in the first place. Because I want actual conservative ideas, not just what we keep getting, the status quo from the establishment. And then thirdly, going back a little bit to this idea of the team spirit, not only do we want to strategize together, and not only do we want to set a standard together for conservative policy, but we also want to hold one another accountable. Because you don't want for a whole bunch of legislators to promise to be conservative and go down there and with great big ideals and then drift away and do nothing. Right? So the idea of a Freedom Caucus is that we have, not only are we strategizing together, and not only are we projecting a different set of ideas, which actually most of our Republican counterparts ran on, it's just they don't actually follow through, but also we are holding each other accountable to follow through. Now, we don't tell each other how to vote. We don't, there's an idea, there's a narrative out there that you probably have heard. Well, somebody in DC, calls us up and says, you have to vote such and such on this bill. None of that happens. But what does happen is we will go up in the block building in the office, and we'll sit down and we'll say, here's some of the things that there's coming down the pike. What are we going to do about it? And we'll say, you know what? Here's the conservative position. Can we hold out for a real conservative position and really hold the line on this issue? Or is this one maybe something we need to let slide, die on another hill later? We can have those conversations. But it's important because there's a lot of things that aren't conservative that happen in Columbia, and you can't always necessarily die on your sword on every issue. But we navigate and we talk with each other. And then if we all come to a conclusion and say, yes, we're gonna hold the line on such and such an issue, or we're gonna make such and such a proposal, we have these amendments that we think we can introduce on those bills to make them better, then we work as a team and we put up those amendments and we vote together on those bills. It's not because somebody tells us to, it's because those are the conservative positions, and we're trying to do what we promised the people that we would do. So what do we want to do? What are our goals? When we talk about policy, when we talk about ideas, what ideas does the Freedom Caucus support? And it can narrow it down to about 5 things. So there's certainly many, many more issues. And it seems like everything, like there's a new issue every day almost. But there's basically 5 things that I would say we want to get done. Judicial reform is one of the big ones. If you are at all aware of what's going on in South Carolina, we know that South Carolina has our legislature elect judges. It's not only the fact that there's attorneys in the legislature that pretty much control the process and then turn around and practice in front of those same judges, which is a massive conflict of interest. But it's also the fact that the elections, quote unquote, are done in back rooms where, it's a handshake method and you never really know who your representative is actually supporting or why. And those representatives, I know from experience, I can tell you as a legislator, that you don't really know who that person is in the first place. You're just having to trust somebody else that said, well, that's a good person. Or you sat down and had one conversation with them maybe, and hopefully that was enough, but you don't get to know them like you need to. So judicial reform is a huge need. Just about any system would probably be better than what we've got now. But I think the gold standard would be the governor appoints with advising consent of the Senate. That's the U.S. Constitution model. So that's what we would love to see. We'll settle for, because again, you can't die on every hill. I think what we could accept would be some changes, some reforms in the Judicial Merit Selection Committee, so that again, you don't have those powerful attorneys controlling every process, every piece of the process. So we want judicial reform. Secondly, we want parental rights and responsibility. And, you know, parental rights, I'm the main sponsor of a parental bill of rights in the House. But parental rights is not really the entire picture. It's parental rights and responsibility. We need parents to step up to the plate, and we want to empower them to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. We need to codify that into law, and then we need to say, how does that work? Even in terms of medical treatment for their kids, parents need to be in charge of that. And then they also need to have responsibility, because we can't allow them to be, you know, cutting up their child, trying to change their gender or that kind of thing. So parental rights and responsibility. And really what that comes down to is just protecting our kids, because the evil in this world is making a full-scale assault on American children, and that has to stop. And so the Freedom Caucus is committed to that. And then thirdly, I would say medical freedom. We had a really big win on this issue last year with the repeal of the certificate of need. 2 years ago, it was a whole bunch of shenanigans. We pushed really hard. The leadership in the House told us we would get the repeal of the certificate of need, and it didn't happen. But thankfully, this year it did happen. Can go more into that, but in general, certificate of need was a hospital monopoly system, and it was where you can't compete and start up as a doctor your own private practice if you're going to have people like, for example, stay overnight, and there was a lot of other regulations. It was forcing most of the doctors to go under the umbrella of a hospital. And so this will take a lot of the power out of the hands of the hospitals, put it back in the hands of private doctors. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually take effect until 2027, but at least we're on track for that. Fourthly, I think state sovereignty is another really big issue that we want to push forward. And I'll give you an example of this. Another of my bills is a bill that would prohibit South Carolina state agencies and local governments from implementing an unratified treaty. The reason this matters is because Joe Biden is pushing the WHO pandemic treaty. He's going to just sign it with an executive order. He's not going to submit it to ratification to the U.S. Senate like the Constitution requires. He's just going to expect to sign it and have everybody go along with it. Well, I don't think we're going to go along with it in South Carolina. But in order to do that, we have to have something in our statutes that prohibit state agencies and state and local governments from implementing that supposed treaty. Because here's what happens if we don't pass something in the law. You're going to see DHEC, you're going to see, you know, law enforcement. They're going to be enforcing guidance from the CDC and from Joe Biden, and they're going to think that they're supposed to, you know, do lockdowns. They're going to think they're supposed to do vaccine mandates if there's a public health emergency. And so we have to stop that from happening in South Carolina. Then fifthly, and finally for right now, because there's so many more issues we could talk about, and I'm sure with the questions and answers, there'll be more covered. But another one is budget transparency and reform, because of an earmark process in South Carolina where there's really no way to know what's being requested and no way to know if the money even goes to it in the first place. So we need actually zero-based budgeting. Ultimately, we need to make sure that the state is only spending money on legitimate items and cut the waste. And then we need to have the earmarks be reformed so that it's not this political carrot and stick project that benefits, again, the political class and the establishment, people that go along to get along. So to sum up, the hope is in you. The Freedom Caucus is trying to be your voice and to stand up for what's right, because in South Carolina, unfortunately, we are not seeing the courage that we need to see. There's a lack of seriousness to fight against the evil that's coming down the pike. We need to fight. We need to stand. And so that's what the Freedom Caucus is committed to doing. Thank you so much. So I guess questions.
Yeah, I've got a mic here. I know we have some people that are hard of hearing a little bit. Anyway, I'm gonna take it around. If you guys want to stay up at the desk there, or if you want to just go up as needed, or whatever you want to do is fine. Anyway, somebody has a question, I know.
Sure.
I know you will.
I always ask questions.
Glad you're here.
I won't be too loud. Where do you guys stand on in terms of like nullification, like Thomas Jefferson used to speak of in the 1800s? Like, where do you stand with that? I know you talked about like with, the WHO and all that, but what about with federal agencies?
So nullification is a broad term, right? In its most, I guess, precise sense, nullification would mean that we are stating the federal law is unconstitutional, therefore it's null and void on its face, right? That's like the 1830s, tariff situation. I personally believe that that's legitimate under the 10th Amendment and Article 6. I think we don't have to go that far in the legislation, though. We can use a tool that everyone agrees exists, which is anti-commandeering, which is the state doesn't have to be compelled to use our resources, our employees, our funding to assist in enforcement of federal law. And right now, we're really not even doing that, right? We're not even really saying that state agencies can't help the government break the law. That's like baseline for me. So that's where we need to start. We need to pass bills so that the nullify who bill isn't really nullification in its most precise sense, but it is using anti-commandeering to say, look, this is something everybody agrees on. The Supreme Court has ruled several times that at least we have the ability, if the 10th Amendment means anything, states at least have the right to refuse to help break the law in the United States of America. And so we need to at least start there. That would be what I would say.
Well, yeah, I do. I actually ran, but I got beat, so I did. I'm not
Good
up
for you
there
for
with
being involved. Thank you.
So one of my observations, can you hear me? One of my observations, interpretation, is there are a lot of foreign students. I'm ex-military, so I have concern about the infiltration of the Chinese communists, the Russians, everybody else who wants to get their hands on the United States. But I've also got nephews, nieces that want to go to the state-supported schools, but they can't get into the state-supported schools because there's not enough slots, and they're being taken over by the foreign students. Especially, I'm not against maybe Germans or people from the Netherlands or whatever, but especially where we've got the communist countries being supported and taking these slots. So that's one thing I had in mind.
Yeah, I agree totally. I'm on the Education and Public Works Committee, and I found out this year that they were preferring out-of-state students over in-state students because they made double the tuition. So that's we just got to stop it. I agree with you.
State students first.
State students first at the normal tuition rates.
Right.
When we approved the budget, 2 weeks ago, how did Representative Bannister put it? We fully funded the tuition freeze. And I was like, what? So in other words, they froze tuition because of inflation, but the state's making up the difference. So the college gets the money anyway. That's one of those head explodes. Like, really? You didn't freeze tuition. You're paying them the difference. But I agree 100%. Talk to me. We'll write a bill.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, guys. And Josiah, of course, we've known each other for a long time. We kind of had to twist your arm to run way back in the day when you were just in high school. It's about that age. And Jake, you as a business owner and stepping up and the things that you've done, again, thank you for running and getting elected. Guys, I said just prior to Trump, Gowdy and Gutless Gowdy, I call them, and Mick Mulvaney, two, that don't stand up for us, that our country is being systematically destroyed, which it has been for, over 100 years. Mulvaney told me not to get my hair on fire. We know that they've sold us out a long time ago. But guys,
I'm probably the only one in here that was born and raised in Boston. I go back to my home state, I don't even recognize it. It's absolutely disgusting. I've been in South Carolina a little over 40 years now because of the military bringing me here. And Josiah, again, to Spartanburg, where you've been representing, okay, there's no way 20, 25, 30 years ago, certainly, that downtown Spartanburg, Black Lives Matter would still be spelled out downtown. I mean, Satan worshiping, I mean, point blank. We know this is an evil, 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 and yet it's promoted in Spartanburg. Okay, I go to the library, as I was at the Packlet Library a couple days ago. LGBT books and this and this and this. So again, systematically, they're taking us as much as they can. So my question is, we know your hearts. Josiah, again, I've known you for a long time. Jay, love hearing you. Thank you, Evan, for being here. We've got your backs. Who do we have as a voice? Like, you know, listen to Real America's Voice. Can we help you guys get more of a voice within the, you know, the people in the state, people here in Lockhart, and Jonesville, and Union County? Who is it that you think we can help you to explain what's really happening? Because again, Josiah, you know the inside story of baseball now because you've been there long enough. So again, my point is there some way we can help you spread the word?
Sure. Our strength is in groups like this, small groups willing to put it all on the line. And, you know, they've got more money than us. They've got all the associations, the NEA, they've got education, they've got the Chamber of Commerce, they've got everything. So it's us knocking on doors, getting the word out. When election time comes, we need more of us and we need more volunteers. And that's just, I mean, I don't know if they're going to run somebody against me. I'm pretty sure they are. They've already spent
$10,000 against me, you know, in an off election year, and I'm the new guy, and I joined these guys, so they don't like me. But I have door knockers. I have people. I always say that I've been screaming at the government from the outside for years, you know, just and now I'm on the inside screaming at government. I haven't changed. I've gotten more conservative as I've seen it happen. Just like you, I don't recognize things. I don't recognize our schools. So it's just getting the word out, you know. Try to have 40 people here next time. I mean, people are waking up like crazy, and it's our job. You know, I just got involved in party politics 2 years ago. I would stay so far away because I heard how negative it was and how just it was the swamp. So we marched in there and we took over Lexington County. I mean, we organized every precinct that we could, and we just booted all the rhinos out. It was so glorious. So we've got to do that at the precinct level. We just got to say, go away. You know, grow your numbers. We're at the disadvantage too, because people think we're completely crazy, but they're slowly waking up. You know, what's that thing they used to call me, a conspiracy theorist? Now I'm a prophet. That's really happening. And as far as how long it's been happening, one of my favorite quotes is from Ron Paul. He said, World War III started on November 22nd, 1963, when our own government killed our president. So thank you. Where you going? So yeah, we understand how enormous this is and what we're up against. It's groups like this. We organized my precinct. I became the EC. Our first meeting, we had 50 people from our precinct alone. And people were like, no, that's your county. I'm like, no, that was my precinct. We knocked on doors. So, you know, whoever's running in this area, you're going to have a list. You should be inviting them to the precinct meetings too, and the county meetings. So we've just got to take it all. I'm done trying to convince them what's happening, because if they don't see it, and we see it in the State House, if they don't see it, they never will. They're, you know, the go along to get along Republicans. So I hope that answered
to that. So I guess your question is getting involved. What is it going to take, right? And let me try to encourage you a little bit. So Jay says he's the pessimist. I guess I have to be the optimist. So it doesn't take very many people to make a change. If you look at how many people vote in one state house district, typically it's around 12,000, 13,000, maybe 14,000, you know, in a good election year. You know, half of that is, you roughly split Republicans, Democrats. Obviously, there's more Republicans in South Carolina in a typical district, but you split that Republican, if you want to say roughly 6,000 strong Republican voters on, just as a average, split that in half. That actually in a primary, there's even less, right? So we're actually talking about of those Republican voters, maybe 3,000 vote in a primary. So what does that mean? That it's roughly 1,500 to 2,000 votes will win a primary. So what you can do is this is what I did in my race. I beat an incumbent with 58% and then was reelected with 69% when I was outspent 3-1 both times. So what I did is I divided up my district, looked at the natural sort of community lines of each of the precincts and things, and had town hall events in each of those communities and door knock specifically in each of those communities, and tried to tailor not my actual message, but how I was saying it, tailor it to what those people wanted to hear and what they were concerned about. Again, not to change my platform, but to relate to them, right? To understand them. And that was very, I think, effective. And to make myself available to those people, knock doors, and then get those people out to vote. When you break it down like that, there's only, 300 people or so in each of these communities, quote unquote, which means one person knocking doors can make a big difference. I mean, you can hit 300 doors in, 3 or 4 months. Also, let me encourage you with one other thing about the legislative process. What we say is that in the state house, as you're, looking for support for a bill, I'm calling these committee members. I'm asking for them to pass a bill. Let's say it's the nullify the WHO. We want South Carolina to stand up against Joe Biden and not give over authority for our pandemics and public health to the international UN. Well, what we would do is we can call. Okay, that's good to call, but a call is essentially 1 vote. An email is essentially 10 votes. A personal letter is essentially 100 votes, but a personal visit to your legislator is the equivalent of 1,000 votes. So if you have a group, even if you have 5 people show up, I'm not talking about to rally so much as to that legislator's place of business or to Columbia and specifically meet with that person. If there's 5 people there, that's like 5,000 votes because you took that time out of your day and you cared about that issue, and they're going to pay attention. If you're their legislator, they better pay attention. So that's why I say it doesn't take a lot of people to make a change. And so I think we've proven that with some of us that have run and won. I think you all have proven that, in many of your local races and things. So one other thought on that subject, and then I'll continue with questions. I love the quote from Samuel Adams. It does not take a majority to prevail, but merely an irate and tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And so that's what we're here to do tonight, is to try to set some brush fires of freedom. And thank you for being part of that.
I think the other big thing too is the conventional wisdom among people who are considering to run or asking people to run is that it's nearly impossible to take out an incumbent, somebody who's already elected. And I would argue, I was actually on the way up here listening to the radio, and John Warren, I don't know if y'all remember that name. He ran for governor in 2018. Yep. He was on the radio, and he was talking about, he has a political action committee, a PAC, called South Carolina's Conservative Future. And they've actually supported many of our members, and they're pretty much exactly like us in terms of ideology and what they think and stuff like that. And he said, it's almost easier in South Carolina to take out an incumbent
than it is an open seat because of how bad these people's voting records are. So if you have anyone who is genuinely like, well, I don't know if I have the money, I'm going to be outspent, this person has special interest behind them, the Chamber of Commerce, whatever it may be, I think it's always very, very good to encourage them that, with a little bit of money, I mean, Josiah is a testament to this. If you go to the people, to the voters and work and tell them how your representative is voted, I mean, I can send you the intel. Not many of the ones around here and other places in the state have voted very well and probably have not voted in a way that would adequately reflect y'all's values. So I would just say definitely encourage people in terms of growing the message and giving the Freedom Caucus more of a voice. The best way is obviously to add members. Sometimes that seems like a steep hill to climb for a lot of people. I would really say that it's not as difficult as it may come across.
Okay.
This goes back to that Volkswagen Scout EV vehicle thing that happened. I just saw this article up on the Daily Caller, and it came up on June 27th, and Ohio did the same thing, and that company just declared bankruptcy.
You were part of that. You were part of that fire.
I watched some of the debate that happened. I think Richard Cash, he made a great argument against it. Unfortunately, we didn't prevail, but I don't think this thing is going to even make it to phase 2.
Yeah.
I don't even know if phase 1 will make it happen.
And we don't wish it to fail, because BMW worked in the upstate. We just don't think it's government's place to pick and choose. And there's some small business owners in the Freedom Caucus. April got up there and spoke on it. I got up there and spoke on it, which, by the way, if we were in the Republican caucus, we wouldn't have been allowed to speak. They tell you your first year, we just want you to sit down and learn. And I think every one of our freshmen was up multiple times. And I could see some of the other freshmen in the Republican caucus, like a little bit shamed. But yeah, we fought that. We voted against it. We got attacked like crazy. One of my big beefs was I've been going to a lot of Department of Transportation meetings, and they say from start to finish, a big road project takes 7 to 11 years. And they were building a $600 million interchange on I-77 in 2.5 years for Volkswagen. And I'm like, which tells me, DOT's just lining up 10 years worth of jobs, and they're, regardless of what the economy does, they're going to be fine. So yeah, we voted against it. A guy behind me, when we all voted against it, literally, I'm not going to say his name, but he said it so I could hear it. He said, "Why are they even here?" And that's just the disconnect. They think it's just fun money. I mean, if we've got that, I hear arguments in the education committee. Kids can't even afford pencils in our schools, and we can't do the education savings accounts. We can't afford this. The roads are terrible. But then they give away $1.3 billion, up to 1.9 in incentives, and they're building a railroad.
400 million of it was cash.
400 million cash. They're building a railroad to it. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And we heard about that. I remember we got a call. I think it was a Freedom Caucus call. Check your email. The governor is making an announcement tomorrow on Friday afternoon. And that's all of us legislators. That's all we heard about the deal that was done with the Department of Commerce, City of Columbia, the legislature, the governor. They all got together. Talk about backroom deals. It'll blow your mind. So we voted against it. We got attacked, and I hope it succeeds, but it just looks like a mess from the beginning.
We've got 4 states. Each have an EV plant.
Yeah, it's insane.
Jay, I think part of the problem with the Volkswagen EV plant is because of everybody relates to the success of the BMW plant. There's a huge difference here. The BMW plant is operating in a known industry, a successful industry. They're very successful at what they're doing. And that's a done deal. It's just too risky to take on the Volkswagen mission.
Well, Toyota won't even.
Not to
build
mention
EVs.
the ESG that Volkswagen is just saturated in.
Yeah. They're
Now,
very low.
did our legislature pass an anti-ESG bill that prevents the state from doing some things with ESG companies?
Not really.
Not yet?
In name only.
Well, how are they going to
Well,
handle the
I'll speak to
Volkswagen
that.
contract?
However,
if
there
they
was
do?
a very suspicious what was the law that we thought was kind of the hate crime bill?
Hate crimes bill.
And we're about 99% sure that has to do with Volkswagen wanting to do business in a state. We're one of only a few states that doesn't have hate crime, and all the Republicans voted for the hate crime bill. It's
Yeah, and to put that into a little perspective too, there's a couple things I wanted to add to that. But to put it in a little perspective, you mentioned hate crimes. I was just in Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, not a bastion for conservatism, right? Like not, I think right now the Democrats have a 1-vote minority in the House. I believe it was every single Republican in the Pennsylvania House voted against the hate crimes bill when it came up. But in South Carolina, just about every Republican voted for it here. The other thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned somebody mentioned how quickly it went through. The bill, which we talked about, it was $400 million in cash, $1.3 billion in total incentives, eventually $1.9 billion once it's completely phased in. It happened in 12 days. And why that's important beyond just the lack of transparency is there are so many good pieces of legislation that would protect freedom and advance liberty in South Carolina. And the committee chairs will usually come back when one of these guys are checking in with them to ask where the bill is in the process. They'll say, well, we don't have time for that. We don't have the bandwidth for that. And usually those questions happen at the beginning of session, but in 12 days, we somehow were able to do a deal that gave $400 million away to a company that, mind you, is being sued by the EU for $1 billion for violating some stuff over there, and but maybe I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, had a drag show for their employees at their Knoxville location. So this is not a company that reflects South Carolina values at all. And you can do all that you want to in prohibiting CRT in schools, but when you're bringing people and you're investing in companies who actively support these ideas, you can't tell me that money's not going to win out over what the parents want. So it's dangerous for a lot of reasons. The ESG component is really important. I think you wanted to speak a little bit to ESG, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. So on ESGs, that's a important segue here. So there was a bill that came out, very weak, I would say. A lot of times that's what happens in Columbia. You've got, strong issues that need to be addressed. Somebody, usually one of us, a conservative in the House, there's other conservatives, a few, but they are out there that aren't members of the Freedom Caucus, but a conservative will introduce legislation. It'll be strong. And then somebody who's really in with House leadership and, all of the establishment folks will introduce their own version. And so lo and behold, that's the issue. That's the version that'll sail through and get passed in the House and then go to the Senate. And usually it will die in the Senate. But the House gets to say, oh, well, we passed that. We already took care of that issue. And it was a pretty milquetoast bill. So that's an example. That's what happened with ESGs. So this year we had a weak bill that got to the House floor, and Freedom Caucus members said, well, we got to improve this. We got to actually deal with the bill. There was a piece of it that was good that helped to divest South Carolina, the retirement system, from investing in ESG companies. Companies that were making their investments based on basically political reasons and these social justice reasons. So so I put up an amendment that added to that. Not only can South Carolina not only can South Carolina not invest in these companies through the retirement system, we also cannot subsidize them. We can't send our incentives to them. If we're bringing jobs, quote unquote, to South Carolina, then it can't be to a company that participates in this ESG social justice stuff. Well, everything, the sky fell out, and the House voted me down, because I was, well, actually, no, on that one, no. Oh my goodness. No, I forgot that this particular amendment, the Speaker pro tem of the House ruled that amendment was not germane to the bill itself. He said that it was an amendment dealing with investments in ESG companies. The bill is about investment in ESG companies, but it's not the same subject matter. And he looked at it and he goes, well, this is about, I don't know what this is actually. I think it's about restricting the free market or something. That rule is non-germane. And he actually apologized to me afterwards. And so, which I appreciated, but it goes to show what we're up against, that there's an assumption being made that Freedom Caucus stuff is already bad and it's already somehow we've got to find ways to keep Freedom Caucus members from essentially getting conservative issues through.
And that is working in our favor because they're voting against the Freedom Caucus, and they're also voting against really good amendments and bills. We put up, we had a separate amendment for every college, university in South Carolina during the budget debate to take out, and they gave us, every college gave us the exact amount they spend on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the Republicans all voted
Except for
all-
5. Yeah, 'cause there's
yeah.
like 5 Republicans who stood.
yeah, all of the amendments down. So, I mean, there's power in that. If we had $1 million to run against them all, we would send out flyers, and these would be truthful as opposed to the ones that they've been sending out against us. So, you good?
One question.
Oh.
Okay, with the current inflation that's going on at the federal level, have we done anything at the state level, or have you guys even taken this into consideration about maybe talking to the Department of Commerce and the state treasury about doing something to hedge against inflation at the state level, possibly like a state mint?
Yes,
Ooh, yes, we have.
That's your.
Ooh, that's the,
So
the lead
Stuart
writer.
from Lawrence County, he put up a bill that they're mocking us for, all of us. They're calling
Gold Coin Society.
the Gold Coin Society, where gold and silver could be legal tender in South Carolina, regardless of what country it's from. It's
Which
just,
other states have passed.
okay. So I
You
had
those made, didn't you?
I had these stickers made, the Gold Coin Society, and we put on our desks in the State House the chocolate gold coins with the Gold Coin Society jar. They poke at us on Twitter, and we poke back. There was a representative that was constantly over and over saying, "I didn't know I had to write it down in crayon for you guys to understand." So literally the next day, we had 20 big boxes of crayons sitting on all our desks. And during the State of the State address, he was behind me, and he was obviously tanked, completely drunk. He came over my shoulder. He's like, "What's up with all the crayons?" And I'm like, "I have no idea. I should have blamed Josiah." But anyway, we had fun with that. But yes, tinfoil hat time. I'm not looking forward to the day where we're trading bullets and eggs, but most of us think that way. I'm as a small business owner, I'm waiting for the crash. It doesn't keep me up at night, but you just have to prepare, and have your ducks in a row and think about how you can protect your family. Unfortunately, money is money, and that's all we have, and you have it in the bank, and I don't trust the banks aren't going to crash. So, you just try to hedge against it.
Josiah, do you want to talk about a specific piece of legislation?
So, well, yeah, I mean, the main one is Stuart Jones has 2 bills. Pretty much the idea is to make gold and silver legal tender, right? So it's not taxed. You can just exchange it freely for, goods and services. So it's really a very modest proposal. I mean, it's nothing radical, but yet, we're the Gold Coin Society because, we want for people to have another alternative medium of exchange. Like that's a very basic thing that has been talked about in the conservative movement for years. Freedom Works did a whole, booklet several years back about sound money, and the importance of this. But anyway, but that's the kind of stuff that's never going to get traction in the state house because by and large, the Republican caucus is not serious about actually preserving freedom. They're serious about their special interest groups that give them the big bucks.
Well, and to add to that, I don't have a huge point, but it does bear mentioning that other states have passed that legislation. It is not this crazy idea that, some tinfoil hat people are wearing. Other substantive states, I want to say there's a couple Midwest states. I think Texas has something right now that they're working on with it. But it's not something crazy. It's a very common sense, sane, constitutional idea. So we'll keep pushing for it. But yeah, it's just as a special
Back in
interest.
cowboy days.
That's right.
When all the gold things.
Exactly.
Well, I kind of add to it real quick.
Yeah,
Okay, so one of the things that I think everyone should consider is the federal government is really bad about saying basically, do what we want or we're going to pull funding.
Right.
So we have our own mint and we have access to resources that we can then transfer into a currency that can be exchanged internally and externally.
Right.
and circumvent that,
Exactly.
then they don't have near as much leverage or power over the state.
There's a guy named I think it's Kevin Freeman. He's with the Blaze. He has a show called Economic War Room. He has a piece of legislation that mirrors that almost exactly. And I want to say it passed. They're working on it in Texas. I think it passed in Tennessee as well. But yes, no, it's a great idea.
Well, can you explain to me, you said you make 10-4, okay, and you keep saying that the other guys with the money, are they actually getting money to put in their pocket?
Did you want to get? I'd love to talk about this one.
I'm tired of the facade. Let's get down to where we really are. We're in a war, and ESG is coming straight out of China.
Right.
All this stuff, it's
So-
time to be just smash mouth.
We'll allow for Evan to comment briefly.
He said
Okay.
it's good. I took the microphone around.
So
we're on film.
I could go forever.
okay, to your question about cronyism, like per se in Colombia, does that happen? I think yes, we know that it has happened. Like I'll give you one example. Rick Quinn, right, was being paid literally to, advance legislation. Basically got out with a slap on the wrist, right? Like 1 year maybe in jail, something like that at most. It does happen. Jimmy Merrill, right? Like was another situation. So it's happened. It's happened recently, and because we have such a poor judicial system in South Carolina that's beholden to the legislature, well, are essentially continue to know what might be happening now. We know that it's happened recently. We don't necessarily know right now what it is. What I would say is the cronyism that I see, I don't know if there's things that change hands in the back rooms or whatever. I'm not privy to that. But what I see on a daily basis is a social currency of pressure and carrots and sticks. Well, you go along with us and we'll help you. And, oh, what do you really want? Well, we can help you get there. And, well, you just need to, go along with the crowd, And so there's this culture in Colombia that if you don't do what everybody else is doing, then you're the odd guy out and we're going to push you away and not listen to anything you say. And so I think that to me is the bigger issue of, if you want to call it cronyism, is more of a social construct. And to a certain degree, you're always going to have that in politics. But I think there's a reason they call it the swamp, is because that's how it feels to me every day in Colombia, that it's like I'm basically being expected to go along with what everybody else is doing. And if I don't, like, okay, well, that's okay. But, you do you if you want to never accomplish anything down here, because we're not going to listen to you unless you do exactly what we tell you to do. So.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, to the question. To start with, you said specifically about funding and how they have all the money compared to us. I would first off say most of the people in the body, we have the most trial lawyers in a political body in the whole country. Typically, a lot of these trial lawyers come from larger firms, and they do elect and choose the judges that they try in front of. I'm not accusing or saying anything about that, but they typically come from money already, is a short answer. The other part about the funding behind them, in addition to that, is South Carolina's biggest issue. The legislators, I would say, there's tons, but if there was one specific set of issues where we fail more than anything, it is crony capitalism, which is the Scout deal. It's taking money that taxpayers have paid through taxes and picking a winner and saying, okay, we're not going to give this to a small business. We're not going to give it to this business. We're picking this specific business. And typically the ramification of crony capitalism, tax subsidies and incentives, playing with the free market, the government getting involved in government planning in the private sector, is there is a chance, an opportunity for some sort of political backing to come from that. The people who bring the bills through the committees and push for these incentives to these big corporations. It's very easy in South Carolina to start a political action committee, to start a PAC. That it's very difficult to trace where the money's coming from. And so I think a lot of the funding, you talk about the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm not trying to demonize the Chamber of Commerce or anything like that, but their agenda, a lot of time, they have a lot of money, and their agenda is at odds with the conservative movement frequently. They push the hate crimes bill. They pushed, they pushed the Scout bill. So a lot of times, it's almost become politically advantageous for elected officials to spend your money in the wrong way, because the more earmarks they can give to their favorite child back in their district, maybe the more campaign contributions they'll get. And that's just the nature of politics. That's I'm not saying any specific instance of that in South Carolina. It's just literally, there's studies done on it. People typically, there's an interesting report. I can't remember who did it, but in some state, I can't remember where, they did a huge deal with some private company where they give them billions of dollars. And funny enough, the next election year, everyone who voted yes for it, their campaign contributions went up by like 45%. So that's where the funding comes from. And these guys don't vote yes for that stuff. So of course it's not going to come from them.
Exactly. It's a lot more insidious than just necessarily cutting a
Right.
check.
Yeah.
It's a lot of a roundabout, but it's there.
Yeah, I don't think it's as obvious. A friend of mine I went to church with, an FBI agent, I saw him at a restaurant a couple months into this first session, and he said, "If you see any fraud down there, let me know." And I looked at him, I go, "I see it every day." And he was like, and I said, "But it's legal." And he went, "Oh, okay." So, yeah, some of the jaw-dropping, "Oh my gosh, what's happening here" moments. When you first go into session, there's an event going on every night that you're there, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And if you stop going to them, which we did immediately, you stop getting invited so much. But probably the craziest one is, "Hey, are you going to the event tonight? What event is that?" "Oh, that's the South Carolina Association of Amphibious whatever." I mean, make it up. There's an association for everything you could ever imagine. And I'm not going. I'm going to go home. They're writing checks. What do you mean they're writing checks? "Oh, you show up and they write you a campaign check." Really? Yeah. So, it just seems, yeah. So, and there's examples that we see, and I don't think it's an immediate payoff, but, Nikki Haley pushing for Boeing. Now she's on their board. Does everybody know the Hugh Leatherman story? Oh my gosh. Yeah. He had a concrete company in his wife's name. His son was on the SIB, State Infrastructure Bank. The roads in Florence are beautiful, and he was the most powerful senator in South Carolina. So yeah, you see it. It's pretty obvious. You don't see. I don't think we'll ever be, thank God, invited into the backroom deals. Somebody asked me about these backroom deals for real estate, and I'm like, "Oh, where's mine?" Just kiddingly. I don't think I'll ever see that, just based on who we're associated with, and we'd call them out. So
I want to add one more thing. I forgot about it. One really good real life example that happened this session. There was if y'all remember the American Rescue Plan funding the Biden bucks that came down because the federal government and state government shut down, the world. So they started cutting checks for different states for different projects. Well, the last bit of that money came to South Carolina. I think it was like $500 million. $536 million. And it was one of the first things we dealt with this session. And the money was just like anything when money's spent in South Carolina. There's not a lot of description. Like you don't really know where a lot of it is going. And so the members offered some different amendments to say, okay, we should go here, do these things. Our chairman, Adam Morgan, proposed a very common sense amendment. He said the amendment was, none of this money, pretty much any elected official in the Senate or House cannot profit off of the projects that money is going to pay for. So if it's a road appraisal or if it's, whatever it might be, asphalt, whatever, paving, you can't make money off of it. A common sense thing. You shouldn't be able to make money off the legislation you pass. And you would have thought that the building was set on fire. People freaking out, accosting members from the well, telling them, these are gotcha amendments, was their famous line. And funny enough, they voted it down. Such a simple amendment. And it does bear to question, and a lot of the arguments were, well, we already have things to protect against this. And the return was, well, why don't we have more then? Is it ever bad to create more transparency? So that's a real world example. I don't know that I can point to any specific thing. Like you said, it's more conceptual and just how the place is set up. And this is, and I do want to say too, it isn't just South Carolina. Every political institution in the country, corporations, lobbies, special interests are trying to buy their access so that they can get their pet projects done. And the best way to combat it is just sending in people who do not care, who do not want to take the money, who do not care to have it.
Yeah. Let me actually make one more point. And some of this is going back to one of y'all mentioned this, that some of it's not just cutting a check.
Yeah.
It's, well, I guess you were talking about it's more roundabout than that. So one of the things that sometimes will happen is a legislator will be, a good, nice, happy legislator for enough years, and then they will immediately suddenly have some great lobbying position afterwards. This happens a lot.
Yes.
And chief example here was actually Speaker Jay Lucas, because Speaker Lucas, and he did a lot of good, but he was probably a genuine man. I mean, I'm not implicating his character. He's just using the system. But what happened was he, we had the certificate of need bill coming, and we were going to vote on it. And then suddenly we didn't vote on it and it died. Who was the main one opposing certificate of need? Prisma. The hospital system was one of the biggest opponents of that. Well, the bill dies. Jay Lucas announces he's resigning. Where is he going to work? Prisma. And it makes you wonder, like, was there an arrangement? I don't know. Maybe they just realized he had been friendly to them, and so they offered the job. I don't know. But that kind of thing happens all the time. That some legislator, either they go immediately to sometimes they become a magistrate, sometimes they become a lobbyist, sometimes they become, like Gary Simrell is another example, went to work immediately for Winthrop. Like, they all have these jobs lined up because they've been nice and good people, that played the game during the time in the State House. So that kind of stuff, again, it's not anything you can necessarily pin down, but it just kind of looks fishy. Why does this happen all the time?
I've got a quick question. How many illegals are in our state, and why the hell are we funding them?
I know the answer to that.
Yeah, I know about EBR5, but they ain't always doing it.
No idea.
I've asked, so I've actually talked with the governor about this and asked, what can be done, and he's concerned about it. I mean, there's an aspect where I wish that Governor McMaster would take more leadership, but there's certain things that he's trying to stay on top of. And I think he genuinely is concerned about this issue of illegals coming into South Carolina. The difficulty is that the federal government doesn't even tell him what's going on. I mean, there's people being bussed in, and nobody knows until somebody calls and says, hey, I just saw a bus, pull into the Walmart parking lot, whatever. And so I don't think that even necessarily the state or SLED or those folks know necessarily when there's illegals coming into South Carolina. They're trying to do more of the vetting and that sort of thing, and trying to be in cooperation, but like DOJ and all of that crowd does not want to give any information, even to McMaster.
But we're spending money on them. How are they getting the welfare,
I think it's like Lutheran services and Catholic
Yeah.
services, and
Well,
they're incentivized by the federal government,
and they're paying them to be the go-to, the middleman.
Can I add to that?
Oh, yeah.
So the way it works, okay, is an NGO says, hey, we're going
Right.
to do something really good. This is really humane. This is for human rights, right? That mantra, right? Hey, federal government, give us a grant. Okay, here you go.
Yeah.
That's where they get the money. And then you're paying for your replacement at the local BMW plant.
Well, I know that, but what about our schools? And what about our hospitals? How are we, why can't we just say, make a law, and I know you guys have all the power, that says, we don't treat anybody that isn't a U.S. citizen, go to North Carolina or something.
Or what about just try to get state mandated E-Verify? At least just, yeah.
We do have federal mandated
We know, but
E-Verify
that's-
that I use as an employer.
But isn't that voluntary? And I've seen the thing.
Now I think it's,
It's required.
yeah, it's required. I've just done it for so long.
What about for the schools?
Nothing's
I don't know what they require.
Require vaccination.
GOP
Oh, geez.
people, we're small in number, but we're tigers. And I want to thank our America First people who really have their